Imagine the crack sounds wrong. Winter, 1907. Pacific Northwest timber country, deep in the Coast Range, where fog makes sound travel strange. You're 70 feet up a Douglas fir that's been growing since before Columbus. Standing on springboards jammed into notches, you cut yourself, and the two-man crosscut saw you're pulling just a bit into something it shouldn't have. Metal, maybe. An old blasting cap some surveyor left 20 years back. The tree shudders. Your partner freezes. In a logging camp coroner's report from that season, one line reads, "Deceased was found 40 yards from the stump, saw still in hand." You don't think about headlines when you're up there. You think about the weight of the blade, the bite of January wind through wool, and whether your boots will hold when everything goes sideways. Most men who fed America's lumber boom never made it to 30. If you believe these men deserve to be remembered, that their sacrifice built the world we live in today, hit that subscribe button, but only if you truly mean it. By the winter of 1906, the Pacific Northwest timber industry was swallowing men as fast as railroads could deliver them. Demand for lumber had exploded. San Francisco was rebuilding after the quake. The Great Plains needed houses. Railroad ties stretched across the continent like stitches holding the nation together. Every board required blood. You arrived at camp the same way thousands did, broke, desperate, or running from something. Maybe all three. The camps squatted in clearings hacked from old-growth forest, miles from the nearest town, accessible only by logging railroad or mud track that disappeared in winter. Bunkhouses held 40 to 60 men sleeping shoulder to shoulder on wooden platforms. The smell hit you first. Wet wool that never dried, wood smoke, unwashed bodies, lice moving between blankets. You learned to sleep with your boots on because if someone stole them, you couldn't work. If you couldn't work, you starved or froze. The company owned everything: the bunks, the blankets, the saws, even the air you breathed. Outside, through walls that leaked rain and wind, you could hear the distant scream of saws already working in the dark. Timber never stopped falling. Men never stopped dying. But none of that mattered once the sun came up. The company system worked like a trap with teeth. You signed on for wages that sounded decent: $3 a day for skilled fallers, $2 for buckers and swampers, until you realized everything cost twice what it should. The company store was the only place to buy food, clothes, or tools within 20 miles. Beans that cost 5 cents in town went for 15 cents. A pair of work gloves ran $1. Your saw, the one you needed to earn anything, could be rented from the company at 50 cents a day or purchased for $30, 2 weeks' wages if you spent nothing on food. Most men were paid in scrip, company-issued tokens, good only at the company store. No cash, no escape. By the end of your first week, you owed more than you'd earned. The company ledgers recorded every purchase, every advance, every debt. One surviving record from a Washington camp shows a faller named Hansen who worked for 7 months and left owing the company $12. He'd worked, bled, nearly died a dozen times, and ended up poorer than when he started. How do you quit a job when quitting means starving in the woods? You didn't. You climbed the tree. You pulled the saw. You prayed. The forest itself felt like something from before the world had rules. Old growth. Douglas fir stretched 300 feet into permanent fog. Trunks 12 feet across at the base. Bark thick enough to dull an axe. These trees had been growing for 500 years. Through storms that would have leveled cities. Through fires and droughts and centuries of silence. Now they were coming down. The terrain made everything harder. Steep slopes where you couldn't see 50 feet through the mist. Ravines that could swallow a crew. Rain that turned earth to soup. In winter, You worked in near darkness until 8 in the morning, lost light again by 4. The nearest doctor was 2 days' travel. The nearest law was further. Timber surveys from the period describe stands so dense that men got lost between the bunkhouse and the worksite, found days later if they were found at all. You learned to look up constantly, scanning the canopy for widowmakers. Dead branches 50 feet long, weighing hundreds of pounds, hanging like loaded guns. The wind moved through the canopy with a sound like distant freight trains. You listened to that wind. You learned what it meant when the pitch changed, when the trees started talking to each other. The trees didn't care what you owed the company. They just waited. By spring of 1907, when the ground firmed enough for heavy work, the real cutting began. Fallers worked in pairs, 2 men, 1 saw, and a tree that could kill them both in a dozen different ways. The crosscut saw ran anywhere from 6 to 12 feet long, depending on the tree. The blade weighed 30 pounds, and the teeth had to be filed sharp every few hours, or the saw would bind and kick. You started by cutting springboard notches into the trunk, 8 or 10 feet up, where the tree narrowed and the wood was clearer. The springboard itself was a plank maybe 6 feet long, with a metal tip that wedged into the notch. You stood on that board 70, 80, sometimes 100 feet in the air, nothing but a wedge of wood between you and the ground. The undercut came first, a wedge removed from the side you wanted the tree to fall. Then the back cut from behind, working toward the undercut until the tree's own weight did the rest. In theory, you gripped the saw handle, you pulled, your partner pushed. The rhythm mattered, smooth, steady, no binding. The rasp of steel on wood became the only sound in the world. Wood dust filled your lungs, sweat soaked through your shirt despite the cold. You felt every vibration through the handle, listening for the change in pitch that meant the tree was starting to go. Sometimes you heard the crack, the moment when the hinge wood began to fail. Sometimes you had 3 seconds to get off the springboard and run. Sometimes you had less. A Washington State accident report from 1907 describes a faller killed by a barber chair when internal stresses make the tree split vertically up the trunk in an explosive failure. The victim was struck by a section of trunk moving at an estimated 60 miles per hour. Death was instantaneous. You learned to read the lean, the wind, the twist in the grain, but that wasn't what killed most men. The real killers were the hang-ups, a tree that doesn't fall clean, that catches in the canopy of another tree and just stays there, suspended, waiting. Hundreds of tons of timber hanging above your head with no warning when it might drop. Could be 5 minutes, could be 5 hours, could be the middle of the next night when no one's around. Removal techniques were all lethal. You could try to cut the supporting tree, which meant working directly under the hung tree with your back to it. You could try to pull it down with cables, which meant standing in the kill zone when the cable snapped or the tree finally let go. One survivor's testimony from a 1908 Labor Commission investigation described working under a hang-up for 3 hours. We knew it could come down any second, but the foreman said clear it or forfeit the day's pay. So we cleared it. The camp had a dark humor about it. They named the worst hang-ups. That's the widow's friend. There's the overtime special. What kills you faster, the tree or the weight? Widowmaker. Branches were the smaller version of the same nightmare. Dead limbs high in the canopy. Loosened by wind or the vibration of falling timber, dropping without warning. A branch the size of a telephone pole, falling 200 feet. You never heard it coming, just the impact. One moment you're walking, the next you're not. The foreman's report would read, struck by falling timber, and the company would dock your crew's pay for the lost production time. Once the tree was down, the real work started. Buckers cut the fallen timber into manageable lengths, 16-foot logs if the mill wanted railroad ties, 40-foot logs for construction lumber. They worked on the ground, cutting through trunks still massive even lying down. Swampers cleared paths through the slash, building roads where steam donkeys could drag the logs. And the steam donkey changed everything. Before the steam donkey, men dragged logs with teams of oxen, slow and brutal. The steam donkey was a portable engine with a massive drum of steel cable, anchored to a stump or dead man buried in the ground. It could pull logs up slopes no animal could climb, could move timber weighing 10 tons. But the cable was death on a spool. Steel cable under tension operates at pressures you can't comprehend until you see what happens when it fails. When a cable snaps, it doesn't just break, it whips. The stored energy releases in a fraction of a second, and the cable becomes a razor traveling faster than you can see. It can cut a man in half. It did, frequently. Company reports from Oregon camps in 1907 list cable accidents as the second highest cause of death after falling timber. Rigging slingers and choker setters worked closest to the danger, wrapping cables around logs, setting the chokers that would hold during the pull, working around moving cables they couldn't inspect. You learn to step carefully, to never turn your back on a loaded line, to listen for the metallic screech that meant something was failing. You set the choker, you stepped back, you signaled, and you trusted that the donkey puncher running the machine knew his equipment, that the cable had been inspected, that the anchor would hold. Most of the time it did. Getting the logs off the mountain required more ingenuity and more death. Log chutes, wooden flumes that ran down mountainsides like massive slides, sent timber hurtling toward the valley at speeds that could shatter anything in the way. Chute tenders kept the logs moving, prevented jams, and died when prevention failed. A jam could back up hundreds of logs. When it released, the entire mass came down at once in an avalanche of timber that sounded like artillery. Splash dams on rivers created artificial floods to float logs downstream. When the dam broke, intentionally or otherwise, the wall of water and timber scoured everything from the riverbed. River drivers, though less common in the Pacific Northwest than in the eastern camps, guided logs through rapids and jams. The most dangerous moment was breaking a jam, standing on shifting logs, using pike poles to dislodge the key timber, then running across the moving surface as the entire mass broke free. You could drown, you could be crushed, you could be impaled on a snag and held underwater until your lungs gave out. The speed of the work never let up. Production quotas measured in board feet per day meant every delay cost money, and the company made sure you knew it. By summer, you'd been working 14-hour days for 5 months straight. Your hands were scarred, fingers bent from old breaks that healed wrong. That evening, back in camp, you counted bunks. 3 empty since spring. 1 man crushed by a rolling log. 1 fell off a springboard. 1 just disappeared, gone between the work site and dinner, body never found. In the company ledger, it was accidental death. To his widow back in Wisconsin, it was Tuesday. But the real horror was how routine it all became. By summer of 1907, peak cutting season, death had become ordinary. You saw a near miss and kept working. Someone fell, someone screamed, someone didn't come back to camp, and the saws never stopped. The production quota demanded 12,000 board feet per day from a standard crew. Miss it, and the foreman docked everyone's pay. Speed killed more men than inexperience ever did. When you're tired, when you've been working 14 hours, and you've got 2 more before dark, you skip the safety check. You don't test the springboard before you trust it with your weight. You don't look up for widowmakers. You don't inspect the cable before you set the choker. Every hour, You chose between speed and survival, and the pressure only went one direction. The foreman didn't care why you were slow. The company didn't care why you were careful. Fatigue multiplied every risk. Your hands shook, your vision blurred, you made mistakes, and in this work, one mistake was enough. New men died fastest, green timber beasts who didn't know what sounds meant danger, who trusted equipment because they'd never seen it fail. But injured men working, hurt died too. A crushed finger becomes infected. You keep working because the alternative is getting fired. The infection spreads. No doctor, no medicine, just whiskey and hope. Sometimes the fever breaks, sometimes it doesn't. A man named Kowalski lost 3 fingers to a cable snap in June. He was back on the rigging crew 5 days later, hand-wrapped in dirty cloth because he owed the company $18 and couldn't afford to stop. He died in July when the infection reached his heart. No one wrote it in the accident reports. He just stopped showing up. You chose between speed and safety every hour. You worked injured. You worked sick. You worked terrified, because stopping meant losing everything. September 14, 1907. The Clatsop Timber Company Camp No. 7, 12 miles west of Vernonia, in the Oregon Coast Range. The crew had been cutting since dawn, running behind quota for the 3rd straight day. The foreman was pushing, and everyone was tired. The cable splice on the main line was 6 months old, overdue for replacement according to company guidelines. But replacement meant a day of lost production. No one inspected it. At 2:47 in the afternoon, the steam donkey pulled a load up the slope, 7 logs with an estimated combined weight of 18 tons. The cable was rated for 20 tons. It should have been fine. The splice failed. The cable snapped at the weakest point, whipping back across the work site faster than anyone could shout a warning. It caught Samuel Hendricks across the chest and lifted him off his feet. He was dead before he hit the ground, his torso nearly severed. The released load rolled backward down the slope. James Morrison was setting a new choker 60 feet downhill. He looked up, saw the logs coming, and tried to run. The lead log struck him at the knees. His legs shattered. He was conscious, screaming, pinned under 5 tons of Douglas fir. 2 men tried to move the log with cant hooks, but they couldn't budge it. The donkey operator reversed the haul back line and tried to cable the log off him. The delay cost 12 minutes. Morrison bleed out, before they freed him. He was 26 years old, from Michigan, and had been married for 6 months. Hendricks was 41, father of 3 daughters, back in Minnesota. The local paper, the Vernonia Eagle, ran 6 lines. Industrial accident at Clatsop Camp claims 2. Operations resume following equipment inspection. The crew found Morrison's cant hook 30 feet from where he died. The company resumed cutting the next morning. They brought in 2 new men from Portland that afternoon. The bunks stayed full, and the saws never stopped. The wind in the canopy sounded different after that, like it was saying names. The numbers tell the story the companies tried to bury. In 1907, logging in the Pacific Northwest killed an estimated 3.5 workers per 1,000 annually. And that's only recorded deaths, only company employees, only accidents witnessed and reported. The actual toll was certainly higher. Loggers died at more than 3 times the rate of coal miners, twice the rate of railroad workers. Falling timber accounted for roughly 40% of fatalities. Cable accidents, equipment failures, and crushing injuries took another 30%. The remaining 30% scattered across drowning, falls from height, explosions, fires, and causes listed simply as miscellaneous industrial. Of men who died, the average age was 29. the injury rate was worse. Limbs crushed, backs broken, hands mangled. Washington state labor records from 1909 show that in camps with more than 50 workers, an average of 1 in 5 men suffered a permanently disabling injury each year. Blind in one eye from flying wood chips, missing fingers, shattered knees that never healed right. These men couldn't fell timber anymore, couldn't handle cable, couldn't do the work. No workers' compensation, no disability pay, just a train ticket back to whatever town they came from and a debt to the company store they'd never pay off. Company record keeping minimized everything. Deaths were accidents, as if random chance and not systematic cost cutting had killed them. Injuries went unrecorded. If the man finished his shift, entire crews could be wiped out in a catastrophic cable failure or a runaway log avalanche, and the report would list operational difficulties without naming the dead. Washington state's first serious labor investigation came in 1911, Oregon's in 1913. Before that, the companies policed themselves, which meant they didn't. Each number was someone's son, someone's husband, someone's father. How many times can you gamble before you lose? In the camps, you gambled every day. Eventually, the odds caught up. The companies knew. They always knew. The calculus was simple and brutal. Replacing a dead worker cost nothing. A train ticket brought a new man from Portland or Seattle within a day. Replacing a steam donkey cost thousands. Upgrading cable before it failed cost production time. Installing safety equipment, cable guards, warning systems, better springboards, cost money that came straight from profit. The companies ran the numbers and made their choice. When a worker died, the typical company response was a one-line notation in the foreman's log and a form letter to the family. If the family could be found, many couldn't. Men worked under false names, ran from debts or warrants, disappeared into the camps and left no forwarding address. Their bodies went into unmarked graves near the camp or were shipped home if someone paid freight. Payment to families, when it came at all, was a token. $25 was common. $50 if the company felt generous. Paid in scrip, naturally. Worthless outside the company store. One documented case from 1908 shows Clatsop Timber paying a widow $30 after her husband was crushed by a rolling log. She owed the company $42 for his accumulated debts. She left the camp owing them $12. Meanwhile, company ledgers valued steam donkeys at $800 to $1,200 each, mainline cable at 15 cents per foot, and timber stands at $2 to $5 per 1,000 board feet standing. A man's life, by comparison, didn't rate an equipment entry. Labor organizing attempts were crushed with the same efficiency the companies brought to timber. The industrial workers of the world, the Wobblies, tried to organize camps starting in 1905. They were met with blacklists, firings, and violence. Camp foremen kept lists of agitators. Known organizers were refused work throughout the region. In isolated camps, far from witnesses or law, organizers sometimes simply disappeared. No one asked questions. You realized eventually that you were disposable. Just another tool, cheaper than the saw you carried, easier to replace than the cable that might kill you. But pressure was building. Change came slowly, soaked in blood. The industrial workers of the world intensified organizing through 1909 and 1910, running strikes that paralyzed operations, demanding 8-hour days and safety standards. The companies fought back, but the pressure wouldn't stop. Washington state passed the first workers' compensation law west of the Mississippi in 1911. Employers had to carry insurance. Injured workers or families of the dead could claim benefits without proving company negligence. Oregon followed in 1913. The amounts were small, a few $100s for a death, weekly payments for injury that barely covered survival. But it was more than nothing, which was an improvement. The danger changed the work, but not the danger. New technology brought more power, faster pulls, and new ways to die when engines exploded or exhaust ignited. Some manual labor shifted to machine operators, donkey punchers, cat skinners, running the early Caterpillar tractors. The danger just redistributed. Every reform was paid for in corpses. The legislative 1911 Washington law came after a legislative investigation prompted by a single-day disaster that killed 11 men when a loaded cable snapped and swept a work site. Oregon's law followed a 1912 fire that burned through a camp and killed 19. Resistance from timber companies was immediate and sustained. Legal challenges, minimal compliance, creative accounting that underreported injuries. Some things improved, some didn't. Camps still trapped men in debt. Work was still brutal. Men still died, just slightly less often. World War I brought a new surge in demand. Spruce for aircraft, lumber for cantonments, ties for military railroads. Production quotas doubled. Immigrant labor poured in. Finns, Swedes, Poles, Italians. Men who spoke no English and understood the dangers only after seeing someone die. The war years, 1917 to 1918, saw fatality rates spike again, despite the new laws. By 1920, the great trees were mostly gone. What remains is silence and stumps. Old-growth Douglas fir that had stood for 5 centuries came down in 20 years. By the 1930s, the Pacific Northwest timber industry had logged an estimated 95% of the original forest. The massive trees are gone. The camps are gone. Rusted cables still snake through second-growth forest. Springboard notches are still visible in ancient stumps if you know where to look. Scars cut into wood that will outlast the men who cut them. Cemetery records in logging towns show clusters of graves from 1900 to 1920. Young men with Swedish names, Finnish names, names that suggest Michigan or Wisconsin or Minnesota. Men who came west and never left. Most graves are unmarked. Most deaths are unrecorded. The vast majority of men who died building America's timber empire left no trace except the buildings their work made possible. The lumber from this era is everywhere. In Victorian houses across the Midwest, in railroad ties that still carry freight, in the frames of cities that grew, while the men who fed them died in mud and fog. Modern logging is dangerous, still among the highest fatality rates of any American industry, but it's incomparable to what it was. Mechanization, regulation, workers' compensation, OSSHA standards. The changes took decades, and every one was resisted. Historical memory has mostly forgotten. The image of the rugged lumberjack persists, romantic and sanitized. The reality was industrial slaughter. Archives hold fragments, accident reports, faded photographs of crews standing in front of massive stumps, company ledgers listing deaths as operational expenses. A few memoirs survived, written by men who lived long enough to retire and remember. Descendants still live in Oregon and Washington, grandchildren of men who survived or didn't. When you see old-growth lumber in a Victorian house, tight-grained and impossibly clear, remember where it came from. The beams above your head, the floors beneath your feet, built on blood, sweat, and the kind of courage that comes from having no other choice. They didn't die building cathedrals. They died building America. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. It's fascinating to see how far these forgotten histories reach. What do you think? Was the cost worth it? Or could we have done better? Share your thoughts below.